Hello everyone, and welcome back to the afternoon session for the First Nations National Landcare presentations. I'd like to thank all those who are joining us today online and those participating in person today. Would you please give a round of applause for our next presenters, Crossing Tenures Landcare, working together with First Nations people in southeast New South Wales. Please welcome Lauren, Linda and Erin. Thank you.
Get this happening. Thank you for this fabulous opportunity to showcase the great work happening with Landcare and First Nations people across the southeast New South Wales. We have entitled this presentation Crossing Tenures, and you will see why shortly. I'm delighted to be joined by my two colleagues, Linda Kavanagh, who is the coordinator for the Burrawa Community Landcare Group and is also our fabulous Regional Landcare Coordinator, and Erin Brinkley, the coordinator for Upper Shoalhaven Landcare Network. My name is Lauren Van Dyke and I'm the coordinator for Upper Snowy Landcare Network. Yes, lots of coordination right here. I will commence with my 5-minute piece and then we will hear from Linda and Erin. Upper Snowy Landcare has the enormous pleasure and great fortune to be positioned on the windswept, stark but stunning Narrigo country on the Monero Plains. We are grateful to have bonded with the original people of this area and pay our respects to them and their ancestors, and we are truly excited and honoured to be working with them. In our patch, tree dieback has killed Eucalyptus viminalis or ribbon gums across an area the size of the ACT. Upper Snowy Landcare has responded by putting in 36 biodiversity plots into mostly private land thanks to many funders. With no real smoking gun on tree dieback, we felt we needed to be more connected to the land and to test different planting and restoration techniques, and so we leased a previously grazed 40-hectare hill on the Gegedzerick Travelling Stock Reserve in Berrydale, a fabulous ribbon gum woodland hill with 36-degree views. The remaining TSR grassland continues to be leased by the local grazier. We didn't even know we could do this or lease this sort of country until we threw our hat in the ring when LLS put out the call for graziers to lease these special places. LLS helped us negotiate with the grazier and then supported our need to erect a fence to keep out stock. At the same time, other groups, like Friends of Grasslands, leased a high conservation value grassland called Top Hut, and they have not looked back. Before we did anything on this country, however, we engaged the local Aboriginal knowledge holders. This was powerful. We held a number of private gatherings on the site with Uncle Snappy and Auntie Ellen, and were delighted to learn that the hill is a significant place for training young Aboriginal people. We organised a 2-day walkover and had another discovery that there was a group called Tracks on the Monero. Tracks is a group of Aboriginal school children supported by Monero Family Support Service, and the aim of Tracks is to facilitate kids' connection to culture and promote social and emotional well-being, positive cultural identity and leadership qualities. With thanks to the Working Together Fund and an Environmental Trust grant, we organised a walkover on Gegedzerick TSR, Travelling Stock Reserve. This was a remarkable success, and we had First Nations elders meeting 40 Tracks children on country. Berrydale locals were invited, and this connection has fostered more First Nations connections. The TSR grassy woodland welcomed the return of cultural cool burns. And we were delighted to have Dan Morgan from Fire Sticks Alliance perform them. Dan is training up more crew members, and so the Gegedzerick training ground is coming full circle. A funny experience occurred when Dan tried like mad to burn inside 6 of our 20-metre enclosures so we could measure fire-stimulated growth and to perform other treatments. But no matter how many times he and his other Fire Sticks people tried to burn the grass, it just would not burn inside these rings. Of course, the fire burnt happily outside the rings, and it was like the fire itself was just not having any influence in burning inside them. We have attracted the attention of the ANU and the CSIRO and are planting climate-tested and fungi-treated seedlings. We're doing veg surveys and trialling planting treatments such as biochar, crusher dust and compost. We are direct seeding with Greening Australia and hydro-mulching along erosion patches. And I must point out here, all this work would not have happened without the passion and dedication of Dr. Margaret McKinnon. She's our chairperson for Upper Snowy Landcare. We have never been busier or happier. Our call to action from this experience is that Aboriginal groups and landcare groups can and should lease travelling stock reserves. We were able to apply for considerable funds to pay for the fence and engage the traditional owners and reinstall First Nations land management practices to influence the restoration of the area. TSRs are the perfect place to reignite the passion of the Aboriginal owners and enliven the spirit in the land. Thank you, and I'll hand over to Linda.
Thank you, Lauren. Boorowa Landcare and Hovels Creek Landcare groups operate across First Nations territory known as Wiradjuri and Ngunnawal country. This walkover helped to connect Landcare with the Cowra and Orange Wiradjuri community, and we extend our respect to the Wiradjuri people and their elders past, present and emerging. And there's been a lot of acknowledgements and a lot of welcoming at this conference, but I just want to say that this continuous connection to country, and we respect those guardians and custodians. Inspired by the Upper Snowy Walk-over, Hovels Creek and Boorowa Community Landcare groups also held a 2-day Aboriginal cultural heritage workshop for local farmers in April this year. With funds from the New South Wales Landcare Working Together program, we chose to focus our efforts on a workshop where Aboriginal people could teach farmers about their culture in a supportive and non-threatening context, and to look at cooperative ways of protecting it on farms. Farmers learnt how to recognise and record it on their properties, sites on their properties, what the legislation said, and how to try and manage and protect those sites in the context of running a farming enterprise. The workshop was presented by Senior Land Services Officers Graham Moore and Greg Ingram from South Coast and Central Tablelands. These amazing support people work with coordinators to help connect Landcare with Indigenous groups. At our fun 2-day camp out, Greg and Graham were assisted by the Orange local Aboriginal Land Council officers, Doug Sutherland and Wayne Wright. Day 1 started with a welcome to country and a smoking ceremony by local Wiradjuri man Murray Coe, followed by a day of classroom learning. We learnt about skin types and social structure and how clans are connected with song lines. Importantly, what to do if you find Aboriginal artefacts on your property that you manage. Aboriginal sites found in New South Wales can be recorded and documented in the Department of Environment's Aboriginal Heritage Information Management System, and the AHIMS link is here on the QR code. The highlight of the gathering was the overnight campover. There's lots of benefits to sharing a meal with people. It builds trust among the people you're working with, sharing the same food. You're likely to respect each other, and it's easier to work together. Doug led the nighttime stargazing, giving people an insight into Aboriginal stories in the stars and how the position of different constellations at different times of the year tell Aboriginal people about food resources and land management. Day 2 was outdoor learning, putting the knowledge into practice. This day was kindly hosted by Lance Graham at the Junction at Wyangla. Shout out to Lance online. Like many others, Lance was initially hesitant about finding Indigenous artefacts on site and the implications to ownership and management of land. But we learnt how to identify artefacts, record the general site information and more specific artefact features, and then how to upload it onto the AHIM system. We needed to dispel the myths and re-establish the real facts. It's important when Aboriginal objects are found that they are left in situ, but they be reported and protected. If you find an Indigenous artefact or site, it won't affect your ownership of the land, but it is important to know what to do so we can preserve its history. Many Indigenous communities would love to start a conversation with you about what's found and the rich history of the country and people. Our call to action, or take-home message today, is that Landcare can help support the integration of cultural knowledge back onto private land. How? By involving First Nations people to find out the cultural heritage value of a site, by building a story about place into your projects, and most importantly, allowing access to land, to involve First Nations people and to help link them back to their cultural practices. The feedback from the farmers attending was uniformly enthusiastic and positive. People felt really comfortable asking what could be considered very difficult questions. It was a rich sharing of knowledge, a great journey. Landcare can support First Nations people to access private land to facilitate connection to country. Thank you, Erin.
Thanks, Linda. Alrighty, hello everyone. I'd like to acknowledge the land our Landcare group lives and works on, the country of the Duraga language group known as Yuin, and pay my respects to the people and culture that have cared for our land for thousands of years. So my network of Upper Shoalhaven Landcare was lucky enough to recently work with Walbunja fire practitioners on a block of Crown land in Mongalo, New South Wales. So the block, known as Broad Gully, is a patch of thick bush right next to the Mongalo village. Miraculously, it escaped the blazes of Black Summer, but given its proximity and the potential risk, the Rural Fire Service flagged the land for hazard reduction. Instead of following standard procedures, the Mongalo community and volunteer Rural Fire Brigade were inspired to do things differently, reaching out and connecting with Landcare and South Coast New South Wales Aboriginal elders. So having successfully secured an increasing resilience to climate change community grant from the New South Wales Government, we were able to host a series of cultural engagement workshops in Broad Gully on Crown land under the banner Healing Country and Community with Good Fire Practices. So the workshops focused on understanding the local vegetation, its seasonality and signals for when the landscape should be burnt. And the final workshop, which was held on the Anzac Day long weekend back in April, was a practical demonstration of traditional burning in action. Under the watchful eye of the Walbunja Rangers, Landcare and Brigade members were able to observe and learn about fire as a tool to reduce bushfire risk and promote biodiversity, picking up their own fire sticks and having a go in the process. Fortunately for us, the grant provider and local Braidwood Community Bank jumped on board to help fund a series of short films documenting the workshop. And so a dedicated and passionate team of videographers led by Braidwood local Claire Young were able to craft some truly inspirational pieces. And there's actually a version linked to the QR code on the bottom right of the screen if you'd like to scan it and watch it later. But having produced these films, we were able to take our story of cultural burning on Crown land to our recent regional Landcare gatherings. So there has been an increasing need in our corner of southeast New South Wales for more cultural engagement within Landcare. In response to this need, at the end of June, on our Regional Community of Practice Day, coordinators and committee members gathered to visit Broad Gully. We were lucky enough to walk on country with Elder Owen Carriage, discussing the burn and witnessing the regeneration already well underway since April. This was followed by a special session at the South East Regional Landcare Muster, where we were able to screen our Healing Country and Community film and then host an in-depth panel discussion at the National Theatre in Braidwood. On the panel, Yuin Walbunja land stewards joined forces with other local leaders to discuss the benefits of traditional burning, as well as the challenges of getting more of it happening on country. Ultimately, the feedback from the muster session was incredibly positive, a real credit to the panel and everyone involved. So to summarise my call to action, our Healing Country and Community project was a wonderful collaborative effort between Landcare, RFS and First Nations people, proving we can get together to observe, learn and share from each other's practices. We were able to successfully mosaic burn over 10 hectares of Crown land, with plans to revisit Broad Gully and continue to collaborate going forward. The event was incredibly beneficial not only for the bush, but also the community, giving us the chance to come together after the catastrophic bushfires and prove burning can be conducted in a safe, peaceful and regenerative way. In the words of Elder Les Simon, a healthy bush is a healthy community, and I strongly encourage you and your group to respectfully reach out to First Nations people in your area. Be a bridge between agencies to help incorporate more traditional practices into how we manage not just Crown land, but across different land tenures. Cultural burning can help build landscape resilience and reduce the impact of future climate extremes like bushfires, but working together is our best solution going forward. Finally, I'd like to send my thanks to the amazing team behind this project. Beck Klomp, Owen Carriage, Andrew White, Paul Bott, Claire Young, I'm so proud of you, and thank you, and back to you, Linda.
Thank you, Erin. Today we represent just a few Landcare groups in the southeast New South Wales. These three projects are just a snapshot, and there's lots of other Landcare and First Nations collaborations happening across our vast region, as you can see by these dots on the map here. One example in March this year involved a group of Landcare coordinators visiting Black Duck Foods. This was a wonderful cultural immersion with delicious and varied Aboriginal traditional foods and included a sunrise greeting at the river. In summarising, we, the coordinators, would especially like to thank Leanne Brooke and Graham Moore, whose work with through LLS has supported Landcare to connect with our local Aboriginal communities in the southeast, and Craig Aspinall, whose work with the New South Wales Landcare Program enabled funding from the Working Together bursaries to hit the ground and made a lot of this work possible. Crossing tenures. Landcare builds connections to country. Thank you so much for listening and letting us share our stories today. But now we invite you and your Landcare network to consider. Could you lease the travelling stock route near you? Could you reach out to support First Nations engagement on private land? Could you collaborate and build landscape resilience on Crown land? The South East is proud to say that the conversations are starting to happen. Thank you. We've got time for questions? Or?
Yeah. Thank you, Linda, Lauren and Erin. Is there any questions in the room? Oh, sorry, can I just bring the microphone over to you?
Just wanted to ask about the lease with the TSR. What was the maximum time you could get that lease over?
We leased it for 5 years. We were not required to pay the lease fee. We paid a small admin fee, but they waived the actual usual fee for graziers, as we were not grazing the land.
Was there an evergreen kind of renewal on that after 5 years?
We're not exactly sure what the next step is, but we will certainly be putting in a bid to either lease it again or find another alternate group to lease it.
So there was going to be a hazard reduction planned, and then the First Nations people got involved. What were some of the differences in the way that burn ended up being carried out?
So I guess we timed it really well. It was cancelled many times because of bad weather and wet weather and COVID and everything like that, but we actually found a right time to burn, so the conditions were quite good. And what really happened was we had the whole team and there was heaps of people there, but we didn't actually go out there with the plan to do the whole thing at once. We actually only did little bits. So the idea is to keep coming back and just do a little bit of fire. So getting everyone there was, it's probably, the strategy was we only needed to do a little bit at a time, not all at once. And so it was a very cool, very low intensity fire. And so we were actually, the same block had been treated by RFS in their standard hazard reduction burn, and to compare and contrast the two burns where they just went and burnt the whole sort of section in one big go and the mid-story has not recovered, compared to the small bit that we did where the fire just went underneath and the mid-story's still there and the grasses are already coming back through. It was a real strong contrast between the two different burn styles.
Apologies if you covered this in your guys' talk, but I was just curious, when you said you were engaged with the Indigenous elders, was there did you guys already know who to contact with your group, or was there a group that you went through to try and make that connection?
For me or for
Anyone?
We reached out to a few different people, but I was actually really lucky in that we had already built very strong connections to the Walbunja fire practitioners. So they had been sort of on the cards to do this burn since 2020, basically. So we had that connection already. But we did reach out to a lot of other people in the area and a lot of other mob, but we were really lucky that we have a really good bond with the South Coast New South Wales Aboriginal elders. Does anyone else want to talk about their...
I just wanted to do a shout out again to our local land services Aboriginal community support officers. So for us in the southeast, that's been Leanne Brooke and Graham Moore, and without their absolutely invaluable help, they've really helped to get coordinators and groups in touch with the local groups. So they've been invaluable.
Well, thank you very much for that.
One more question?
Just the last question.
I like the fact that there's such a collision going on here. You've got the collision of cultures, and I don't mean the collision in a bad way, but you've also got that consequence of timing. You know, you're talking about timing. You're waiting, and there's patience, and so you've got the two stories. They're sort of butting against each other. There's a real edge there. How are you finding that transition between the transfer of the cultural science to the mainstream, you know, thinking of the Western community? Are you getting headway, and are people starting to appreciate this knowledge and its value looking to the future?
You're right, it's very difficult. There's a lot of controversy there, but we're really lucky in that, I guess, from the bushfires, it was so bad in our area that people were they realised that we need to do something differently, so that there's a real need and passion to try and incorporate these practices. So even though there's been a lot of tension between RFS and our First Nations people, we're at that kind of level where we actually want to do things differently. So I'm really lucky that in our community, the platform's there and we're already having those conversations to try and get more connections happening between our different fire groups. And yeah, so we're at that sort of base level, but it's a high ceiling that we're trying to break through, that we're hoping with potentially crafting some of the videos that we're going to do, we are going to be taking it to the more regional level at least, those kind of conversations of getting more traditional fire practices into how we manage the land. But it's going to be a hard road, and there's going to be lots of hurdles, but the momentum's there in our community to get it done.
And can you see Landcare groups helping you? How can there's people here in this gathering, how can it sort of assist with what you're doing?
I think, I feel like Landcare can be the glue between the different agencies. We can help try and bring these people together, because in my network, there is so much interest there to incorporate and learn from traditional practices. So we're really ready to hear the story and make it happen. But yeah, it's all about people just like what Pam was saying, asking, reaching out to the coordinators, reaching out to the first people and just asking them, what can we do in this space to try and make some change? But anyone else would like to say?
I'll just make one last point about the science. We were, as I mentioned, lucky enough to have Dr. Margaret McKinnon, our scientist, measuring, recording, monitoring everything we do, and I think that's going to help and bring the whole thing along very quickly. If we can start showcasing what these cool burns will be doing and what other Indigenous land management practices, the effect they'll have on country. So if we can get that science out there as soon as we can, I think that'll help drive things along.
Okay, so just one more question.
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm the Aboriginal Landcare Officer with North Coast. So a lot of my Landcare networks are sort of afraid to do these type of burns and drop a match because of the liability issue of no insurance.
Yep.
So I want to address that elephant in the room topic to start with.
Yep.
And then the other topic for me is, do you have any Aboriginal staff in your region? Because something like this needs to be Indigenous-led. And to answer your question, Kostya, was my experience so far is every state government department is doing their own silo works in regards to cultural burns. Like I said, it needs to be Indigenous-led. Landcare's role, I thought about this for a while, is doing exactly this, facilitating the workshops, doing the public engagement. But it needs to be led by your fire practitioners.
Yep,
in
I
your area.
completely
So
agree.
It's about building that network of fire practitioners for them
I completely agree, and obviously Landcare is in a process of reviewing the Landcare New South Wales program, and that's a big push from our end to try and get those Aboriginal coordinators and facilitators as part of our network, because yes, we don't have those support roles in our district at the moment and it's suffering for it. So I would love to have more cultural engagement in that way. But yeah, in terms of the insurance issue, we were lucky in terms of the RFS has a lot of training and they've got it covered, and the First Nations people have also worked really hard to get their practices covered under their own insurance, so we're able to come into that banner. But yes, yes, they did.
No, the fire practitioners.
They did. Yeah.
What's more about that? Because to my knowledge, I don't think there is any insurance covered in New South Wales.
They've managed to negotiate something. Yeah, they told me it was a long and hard process, but they got there. But yes,
Because in my region, the LLS is wanting to use the TSR ground as a training ground for cultural burns.
that's a good idea, isn't it?
Thanks for those questions. We actually have to wrap it up now. It's gone over a bit, but thank you again for your presentation and